You know, in the long history of empires, very few have fallen so fast, so brutally, and against such impossible odds. This is a story about two worlds colliding, a line being drawn in the sand, and a room literally overflowing with gold. This is the story of how the Inca Empire ended.
It's the question that just hangs in the air, right? On one side, you have this massive civilization. We're talking 10 million people, masters of the mountains, led by a man they believed was a living god. And on the other, a handful of gritty, desperate adventurers, thousands of miles from anything they knew. How on earth did the impossible happen? Well, the answer really boils down to one single terrible encounter in a dusty town square high in the Andes.
So to really get our heads around this epic, we're leaning on a truly monumental piece of history. William H. Prescott's 1847 masterpiece, The Conquest of Peru. He painstakingly pieced the whole story together from the original accounts, and honestly, it reads like a Greek tragedy. So in this explainer, we're going to walk through its most dramatic scenes.
Okay, Act 1. To understand the collision, first you have to understand the forces that were on a collision course. These were two completely separate streams of human history that had no idea the other existed, and they were about to converge with absolutely devastating force.
Try to picture this: an empire stretching 2,500 miles along the spine of South America. This was the Inca realm, a total marvel of engineering and social organization, and it was completely cut off from the rest of the planet. As far as its people knew, they were the entire world.
And look, this was no simple society. At the very top was the Sapa Inca, who they believed was a direct descendant of the sun god. The whole empire was stitched together by this incredible road system that was honestly as good as anything the Romans built. It was a world without writing as we think of it, but it was so meticulously organized, from the powerful nobles all the way down to the last farmer. And their stonework, it's so perfect it still baffles engineers today.
And at the absolute center of their spiritual universe was a metal that glowed just like the sun. But here is the most important detail, the thing you have to understand. For the Inca, gold had zero monetary value. It wasn't money. It was divine. They called it the tears of the sun, and it was used for one thing only: to decorate their gods, their temples, and their emperor.
I mean, the sheer amount of this sacred wealth is it's hard to even comprehend. Prescott describes the Great Temple of the Sun as a place that's almost beyond belief. Its walls were covered in thick plates of gold, and its gardens, everything was recreated in precious metal. Fields of corn with silver stalks and golden ears, life-sized llamas, shepherds, birds, all of it crafted from the literal stuff of the gods.
But thousands of miles away, across an ocean the Inca didn't even know was there, was another world entirely. A world where gold wasn't the tears of a god. It was the key to everything. To power, to status, to anything a man could ever want. And whispers of a land just dripping with it, a mythical place they called El Dorado, had started to reach some of the most ambitious and ruthless men in the Spanish colonies.
The mismatch here is just absurd. Seriously, look at these numbers. An empire of millions against a company of 168 men. But these numbers are hiding something terrifying. The Spanish had advantages the Inca couldn't even imagine: steel armor, razor-sharp swords, the psychological terror of cavalry, and of course, gunpowder. And even worse, an invisible ally had come before them: diseases like smallpox, which had already torn through the empire, killing thousands, and even triggering a brutal civil war that the Inca Emperor Atahualpa had just won.
And this wasn't some quick invasion. No, this was a slow, grueling, decade-long obsession. Francisco Pizarro and his crew went through failed expeditions, starvation, disease, you name it. By the time they finally clawed their way over the Andes in 1532, they were this hardened, desperate group with absolutely nothing left to lose. And on November 15th, they looked down into a valley and saw the campfires of the Sapa Inca, Atahualpa, surrounded by his massive, victorious army.
All right, Act 2. This is the moment. The fuse is lit. The two worlds, who for all of human history had no idea the other existed, are about to meet. And it's going to be an explosion of violence and misunderstanding that will bring an entire empire to its knees.
Pizarro knew, he just knew he couldn't win a straight-up fight. His only shot was a move of pure, shocking audacity. He invited the Emperor Atahualpa for a peaceful meeting in the empty town square of Cajamarca. But while he was extending the hand of friendship, he was planning a meticulous, brutal ambush. It was a Hail Mary, a desperate gamble that would decide everything.
And this is where you can really see the fatal misunderstanding between these two men.
Atahualpa, a literal god on earth, fresh off a major military victory, agrees to meet this tiny band of weird bearded strangers. He shows up in all his splendor, carried on a golden throne, surrounded by thousands of his court in a ceremonial procession. They're mostly unarmed. He just cannot imagine that he's in any danger. Meanwhile, Pizarro's men, terrified but determined, are hidden away. Steel, gunpowder, and war horses, just waiting in the shadows.
Into this dead silent square walks a single man, a friar. He holds up a Bible and, through a clumsy interpreter, he basically demands that Atahualpa give up his own gods and swear allegiance to the Christian God and the King of Spain. Atahualpa is confused, then he's insulted. He asks, "By what authority do you say this?" The friar points to the book. Atahualpa takes this strange object, looks it over, even holds it to his ear, and, when he hears nothing, he just throws it on the ground. That was the signal Pizarro had been waiting for.
All at once, the silence is shattered by a cannon blast and the war cry, "Santiago!" From every doorway, armored Spaniards on foot and on horseback charge into the terrified, unarmed crowd. The cavalry, these terrifying monsters the Inca had never faced in battle, just trampled people. Toledo steel swords sliced through ceremonial robes. It wasn't a battle, it was a massacre. And in the middle of the chaos, Pizarro himself fought through the guards to physically grab the emperor.
In less than 2 hours, it was all over. Thousands of Inca were dead in the square. Not a single Spaniard had been killed. And Atahualpa, the son of the sun, the absolute ruler of the largest empire on earth, was now the prisoner of 168 men. The head of the entire empire had just been cut off.
So the capture of a god king sends this massive shockwave through the empire. What happens next? Well, it's one of the most astonishing and tragic stories of greed, betrayal, and cultural annihilation you will ever hear.
Atahualpa was sharp. He figured out his captures really fast. They didn't care about land or power in the way he understood it. They had this fever for gold. So he makes them an offer that is just beyond their wildest dreams. Standing in his cell, he reaches up as high as he can, makes a mark on the wall, and promises to fill the entire room to that height with gold. Not cover the floor, fill it. And then fill it twice more with silver. Do that, and they set him free.
Pizarro agrees, of course. And so the order goes out across the empire. From the Great Temple in Cuzco, from palaces and shrines miles away, the ransom starts to arrive. It comes on the backs of llamas and porters. And it's not coins or bars of gold, it's the sacred art of an entire civilization. Golden fountains, thrones covered in jewels, intricate statues, the cultural lifeblood of an empire, all being brought in to save its king.
And this is where the tragedy just gets so much worse. The conquistadors see no beauty in any of it, no spiritual value. They just see weight. They force Inca metalsmiths to build forges, and for weeks, these irreplaceable, centuries-old masterpieces are just fed into the fire, melted down into crude, identical bars so they'd be easier to divide up. The art of a civilization literally went up in smoke. And eventually, the promise was kept. The room was filled.
Pizarro and his men were now richer than kings. I mean, incomprehensibly wealthy. But all that gold just brought fear. They were a tiny group of guys in the middle of a vast empire. Rumors started to fly, maybe started by Pizarro's own rivals, that Atahualpa was secretly ordering his armies to attack. The living god, even in chains, was just too powerful, too much of a symbol. Greed had turned into paranoia.
So, to justify what they were about to do, the Spanish put him on trial. It was a complete farce. Atahualpa was charged with crimes that made no sense in his world, like idolatry, having too many wives, and treason against invaders he'd never sworn loyalty to. The men accusing him were also his judges. His fate was sealed before it even started. He was found guilty and sentenced to be burned at the stake. A terrifying fate for an Inca who believed the body had to be preserved for the afterlife.
At the very last moment, the friar offered him a deal. Get baptized as a Christian, and he would be granted a more merciful death by strangulation. Desperate to keep his body intact, Atahualpa agreed. And so, in the exact same square where he had arrived as a god, he was tied to a stake and killed. With his death, the central pillar of the Inca world was just gone. The empire was now leaderless, and it began to fracture and fall apart.
So in the end, what really conquered the Inca? Was it the steel, the germs, the horses, or was it something else? A greed for gold so overpowering it could erase history? A paranoia that was born from a guilty conscience? Or maybe, was it just the colossal, tragic failure of two worlds meeting for the very first time to see each other as anything more than an obstacle to be removed? The answer, a lot like the gold of the Inca, is probably lost to time.